Well, welcome back to the channel, boys and girls. Sorry I've been gone for a little bit. I lost my voice and I'm slowly getting it back. Today we're doing something that's kind of overlooked, and I've overlooked it for about 2 years, so I have no idea how long mine have been broken. Let's roll the intro, we'll get into it. Alright, so I am very close to doing the Wilwood brakes at all four corners. I keep having little hiccups along the way. This one being the rear outer tie rods. These guys right here. Just on a whim, when I was replacing my rear wheels the other day, when I was, getting them all done with the square setup, I noticed that I had a wobble at 9 3 degrees, and typically that means you got a bad tie rod, and sure enough, I did. And we go to the car, I'll show you how you can diagnose between a wheel bearing and a tie rod. I picked these up online for about $50 a piece, not too expensive. They were kind of hard to find though, and a lot of sites aren't too descriptive between the front and rear outer tie rods. Now you can use a rear outer tie rod in the front, but you cannot use a front and the rear just because of how long this, not shaft, but outer shaft, I guess you'd call it, is on the rear is longer than the front. And then the kit actually comes with a little grease fitting, which is pretty cool. It's called the Zerg fitting, cotter pin, looks like a washer, and your castle nut. It isn't a hard job to do by any means. I'll show you one wheel. I'll show you how I measure it. We'll be getting alignment done again soon to fix the camber a little bit in the front, so I'll have them look at the rear as well. We'll get it back to pretty close how it looks coming off the car. Not that hard of a job, but I thought I'd film it if you guys are curious. And I learned this too, is that the rear outer tie rods are susceptible to failing on C5s. And this is something, I know a lot about this car. I didn't know that. A lot of heat transfer from the rear rotors right there. It's very close to the rear brakes. So yeah, they do tend to fail quite a bit. And sure enough, both of our rear outers were shot. After this, I'm doing one more thing before I'm finally tackling the brakes. So that will be the solid bushing for the front steering. In factory form. The one thing about this car I've never cared for is the steering characteristics. Even tightening the steering nut and making sure everything in the entire rack is tight. It's never felt great on center. It's always a little vague. The C6 is also hydraulic, but it feels better, and the C7 has electric steering, but it feels amazing. I can imagine the C8 is even better than that. But yeah, the C5 steering is always something I've never cared for in the C5. That's kind of the one thing I don't care about this car, is the way the steering feels. So I will address that with a solid bushing for the rack. Some people says it helps quite a bit, so maybe later this week I'll do a video on that. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop talking. We'll go over to the car, take a wheel off, and I'll walk you through the process and show you how you can find a bad rear outer tie rod, or any tie rod really, versus a bad wheel hub. All right, let's go. All right, here's a real quick crash course on how to figure out if you got a bad tie rod or a bad wheel bearing. Now, if you grab at your 9 3, give it a little wiggle, and I don't know if you can tell on camera, but it's moving about a half a degree, the whole wheel. It's pretty bad. Now, if you grab at 12 6, nothing, rock solid. That means the hub itself is fine, no movement. But the tie rod, which can give it toe in and out, has just little play in the ball joint, and you'll notice more tram lighting and hard acceleration or around tight corners or curves. You might get a little twitchiness in the back, and I do on occasion. Now I know where that's coming from. It's coming from the rear outer tie rod. So I'm gonna go get this wheel off, and I'll walk you through the process on how to replace it. Now, putting a new outer tie rod on, you have two options here. If it's an exact replica, like the exact same OE model, you can literally undo the jam nut, take off the castle nut, and unthread it and count the threads and put the new one on exactly the same. However, this is not identical to OE. This is a slightly more fortified one for the heat. This is the OE one, I'm sure, from 2001, and these are known to fail, and this one has failed. So I got a little more heavy duty one, and it is a little longer. So if I use the same threads, it would probably be off about 4 degrees on toe. So what I'm going to do is take my handy dandy tape measure and just take a whole number. I'm using 7, and there's a little groove right here, on your knuckle. And I'm using that as a reference point and putting it right on 7 and making a reference point looking overhead right on top of it back here. Make a little mark. If you can see it, my finger. Boom, that's exactly 7 inches to this guy right here. And that's what I'm going to use as my reference point. And again, I'll be getting this aligned probably this weekend, so it's okay for short distance driving if it's off just a little bit. So to get this guy off, all I'm going to do is undo this castle nut, and I'm going to bang this out to the knuckle. We're going to undo that jam nut, and this thing will screw right off. Oh, and by the way, the nut up here is a 18. It's interesting that the factory one doesn't have a castle nut with a cotter pin. Interesting, but the new one does. Huh. All right, and one quick whack with that larger hammer there. This thing came right out. Probably the easiest tie rod I've ever got out of a knuckle before. And you can see how worn this ball joint is. It's pretty done. New one's nice and firm. So I'm gonna go ahead, undo the jam nut, get this guy off. All right, now a little bit of a fight, not too bad. Yeah, this thing is totally shy. You can see the boots ripped right there. You should never hear that in a tie rod, ever. The inner's pretty good, nice and solid, so I'm okay with that deal. Getting the jam nut off was kind of a production. I ended up using the jack itself as kind of a counterweight with a wrench, and I used the jack, the weight of the car, to undo it. It wasn't too bad at all. Yeah, this job's not too bad, so I'm going to throw the new one on and get it secured and show you what we're dealing with. All right, so 2 things real quick. The kit's fine, the quality of the tie rod is just fine, but the castle nut up here, as you can see, the hole that goes through it that's supposed to use your cotter pin, kind of like lock wire, is a little high. So I'm going to add one more washer tomorrow. This will be fine till tomorrow. And then I got to get a new cotter pin. I think that went up pretty good. But nonetheless, just if you use this kit, just know that you're going to need a second washer. And got my measurements in. Boom. It's hard to tell from right there, but it is on the dot 7, and I'm happy with that until I get an alignment. And yeah, hopefully I'll see you guys in a couple days. We'll try to tighten up that steering with that solid steel bushing. It's steel or aluminum, one or the other, but it goes from rubber bushing to a solid steel bushing. That'll be a fun little experiment for all of us to see how that works, rather. So I hope you guys found this informative, and make sure you check those rear tie rod ends, because apparently they're crap. So, all right, guys, go enjoy your weekend, and I'll see you guys next time. Mark out.